So while you may not have had influence on the general population, you think through osmosis the media were picking up your message and then perhaps spewing it out not knowingly?
Well, these new media tools are developing in Canada as they have in the United States, and we are starting to see a greater pickup among just average voting Canadians. Like, for example, the 80-year-old grandfather is sending YouTube videos to his all of his friends. So we're starting to see that in Canada in a bigger way.
Andrew, you want in on that?
Well, I just wanted to add that, you know, in the United States, the primary example of voter-generated content having an effect and then ultimately forcing the mainstream media to follow on was the Macaca moment, where Senator George Allen used that term, and it destroyed his run for the Senate and then his presidential aspirations, mostly because of YouTube. So we've seen blogs and other platforms, whether they be YouTube or Facebook or MySpace, continue to evolve over time, and it's very true that the mainstream media now is using the internet to follow the campaigns, and many of the stories that first appear get sourced on the internet. In fact, most recently in this election, the Sarah Palin pregnancy rumor was what caused quite a little furor, which got started out on the blogs. So the analogy that I'd like to share with everyone is that the internet in 2004 was sort of allowed into the conference room of politics. And by 2006, it was allowed to sit at the table. But in 2008, it's actually sitting at the head of the table holding the agenda. And we're going to see the internet continue to be a primary driver of political information and news, whether it's being sourced by the media or driven by people themselves.
There was another Macaca-like moment not too long ago, in fact. I'm sure you're all aware of it. This happened when Obama was giving a speech in San Francisco, and he made some references that came back to haunt him. Let's roll that tape, and we'll remember that. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, it's not surprising then that they get better and they cling to guns or religion or antipathy towards people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment, or anti-trade sentiment, and a way to explain their frustrations. Now, these are in some communities.
The famous clinging to guns and religion speech that Obama was giving, unaware that somebody was taping him. Katie, you hang out with a lot of politicians, and I want to get your sense about whether they yet understand that they are living and campaigning in a different world right now, that it's not just you journalists they've got to worry about, it's anybody with a cell phone or anybody with a digital tape recorder.
Well, sometimes I feel like I have the worst of both worlds, because I have politicians eyeing me suspiciously and asking me if I'm live blogging at that very moment, and of course I'm also, part of the so-called dreaded mainstream media. So as far as that goes, yeah, I think they are. If they're not more careful, their aides definitely are, and they keep this in mind when they're. I can't imagine someone making an unscripted remark like that without their aides basically jumping on stage and tackling them like a like a sack of potatoes to stop that from happening. And it isn't actually, it's not so much the bloggers they're worried about, sorry guys, but it's the other campaign whose war room has sent camera crews to film and to look for exactly these sorts of moments. And that's become de rigueur in terms of these campaigns. I mean, everyone has people following the others, shadowing the other campaigns and looking for those exactly the moment. They're not I don't think you can exactly consider them just bloggers, in the sense that in most cases they're volunteers or even paid by the various, respective war rooms. But at the same time, they do have that sort of immediacy of access, and what they can then do is feed that stuff out into the blogs and to get people who aren't necessarily, officially tied to the party to push that forward. And I think as journalists, just to bring it back around, we have to be really careful to make sure when we report on, say, a controversy that erupts, that we're not unknowingly exacerbating an artificial controversy that's been created kind of for a particular reason in the blogs that we're then going to treat as something that, real normal people are really spontaneously upset about. I'm not saying it never happens, but I think that we have to be real careful when we're sort of following the debate and the outrages on the blogs to make sure
that... Well, this is it. That's
it.
Let me follow up with Greg on this, because I don't mean this to sound too highfalutin, but if election campaigns now are simply exercises in trying to send your amateurs out there and catch the other candidate doing something embarrassing so they can upload it to YouTube and, have a gotcha moment for X number of millions of people. Is that good for democracy?
I think it's good for democracy if we consider it as an expansion of the public sphere, of the public record. I think that is helpful. At first, perhaps it's an embarrassing moment, but if a candidate or a leader embarrasses him or herself over and over and over, it does say something about that candidate. So I think There are only so many reporters in this country who are going to be covering this campaign, and I think it's a good thing that we have a whole cadre of other bloggers and video bloggers who are out there who are capturing things that can become part of that narrative that media and amateur media and mainstream media tell us about who the leaders are, what their policies are about, and who they are as human beings.
Warren, let me get your follow-up on that, because you've obviously been involved in a lot of campaigns over the years. There's essentially no more, there's no such thing as privacy anymore on the campaign trail. If a candidate is going and having what he thinks is a private conversation with somebody at the door, and there's a Tory tube or somebody else hanging out in the bushes somewhere else, it's not a private conversation anymore. Is that good for democracy?
Well, what we did in the McGuinty campaign last year, we had a couple guys who were following around McGuinty, and we had a couple guys, I called them road warriors, following around Tory. And this, can I do show and tell?
Sure,
I'm a guy, and I'm a total gadget victim. So here are two things that I predict are going to transform campaigns in the next while. This one you can get for 150 bucks at a store. It allows you, it is called a flip video, and you can shoot stuff, 60 minutes worth of stuff, load it directly to your laptop or your PC, and then upload it to YouTube and to MySpace within minutes. And then the BlackBerry, the Bold, has got a really high quality video camera in it right now, and I predict this thing is going to be a factor in the current Canadian political campaign.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Let me just take you one step further. Nokia makes a N95 and an N96 5-megapixel cell phone camera that allows you to take moving video and post it right to the web live through a site called Kite or another site called Quick, where literally it's like a YouTube, but it's live, so that as soon as you turn the camera on, it's going live to the web, and no matter what the politician or someone says, they may turn off the camera, even confiscate the camera. It's too late. It's already on the web, and it's embedded in the what I call the TiVo of our time.
Do you like this turn of events?
I do. I actually think that transparency is a big issue in politics, and I think politicians need to learn that they're much better off telling us the truth rather than parsing their historic comments in a way that sort of fits their political needs at any given moment. And there's far more going on than just the technology of capturing politicians in their town hall meetings, their fundraisers, or on the campaign trail. There's a huge amount of data that's starting to become available about who's giving the money, who they're meeting with, how are they influenced, where do they live. These people work for us, and we as citizens have a right to know what they do and how they behave. And if there are politicians who don't like that, then so be it. They shouldn't be in this business.
But in the public space, because what we encountered last year on the Ontario campaign is a lot of the media people, actually most of the media people, were irritated with all these young men and young women running around with cameras, saying, well, that's our job, and there was some give and take there. So what we did is we agreed to only go in the places that were public. They were places that the media were permitted to go, and we had an agreement. And in fact, with the other parties, we would not go into private space and track somebody picking their nose or what have you.
The president of the Parliamentary Press Gallery once famously said that there are people following politicians around in cameras within the precincts of Parliament, and that all they're looking for is these gotcha macaca moments. Well, if that increases transparency in government, I say, well, so be it. And blogging is just helping.
I think it's a matter of social norms. I mean, when cell phones first came out, they used to ring in theaters, and now people now know to turn them off when they go into a theater pretty naturally. It's going to take a while to establish exactly what the social norms are here and what's appropriate and what's not. But I think the idea of having to make a deal with the mainstream media about what's public and what's not, for a politician to trust that, I think is going to be naive, because as you showed in that clip, that recording of Barack Obama, that was actually done at a fundraiser, and that recording was done by a supporter. Some
friend.
Well, it wasn't. The point here is that that she was actually a citizen journalist who caught that on tape, and she was actually torn between her responsibilities to her democracy and her interest in helping him get elected. And also a lot of that comment was taken out of context by the mainstream media, which I'd like to point out live in an economy of scarcity, because there's a limited amount of time and a limited amount of space, and they have to try to condense things in a way that sometimes doesn't give the full measure of the comment or the context of the comment.